What's good, everyone? What's good? Welcome to an episode of Opinionated with yours truly. I am your host, Wrestler, and I want to talk about something that I've been noticing a lot when it comes to things that are being said in social media about the change in dynamics of, well, what's necessarily what has changed when it comes to the landscape of going forward between men and women. And normally, I don't even like to talk about these conversations when it comes to male and female dynamics because you have plenty of shows and plenty of podcasts that have been doing that for years. There's just so many now. The part that I'm trying to talk about right now is whether it's from people who are in very critical thinking spaces or people who are even psychological expert. They're a conversation that comes up, and it's essentially in the current age, in the current era that we're in right now. Do men and women still need each other? This is not about being together, getting together, no things like that. The question just really stems down to, given the kind of advancements in the world we are right now, the current age that we are right now, do men and women still need each other? I was sitting here trying to break down a bunch of points to myself as I was thinking about this. And in a lot of ways, I'm thinking to myself, we need to talk about this. I'll give you what I'm thinking, and then hopefully we can have a conversation about this. So if I want to break this down, I guess I'll start from the beginning because again, we'll talk as if people have not really heard too much of the conversation before. In particular spaces that I run around, I hear these things a lot. I hear the difference between power dynamics and sexual dynamics. Not really hear too much about whether both genders really need each other anymore and why. Without it coming becoming something toxic or disparaging, but an actual genuine conversation that won't fall into debauchery or like I said, power dynamics. Now, since I'm just gonna have the conversation by myself, pretty much with you, until I'm really ready to have this conversation with other people in a real genuine, an authentic way. I'm just gonna tell you what's going on through my mind. So if I had to go looking back, we're just gonna start off on a historical context. If we're looking back, we need to think about how things used to be in the past, when men and women had specific roles that they were expected to fill. I mean, you could look at it different ways depending on where you are in the world and what time period that you were in the world, because you definitely have men and women who were both farmers. You have women that were weavers. You have men that were soldiers. They went to war. It's everything different. You had male witch doctors, but you also had women witch doctors. Women priestess. It depends on there were always different dynamics of what men worked on and what women worked on. You know, you never heard. I'll say this. I never heard of a male nun, not unless they were robbing banks with masks on. But those are movies. But there were always different roles when it came to what were the expectations back in historical societies, and just basically how often they relied on the specific roles between men and women. And each member had a role and responsibility that they needed to fill in, that it was required for them to fill in. But understanding the historical context helps us appreciate how society and their expectations have evolved over time. So, what are some of the things that helped change in the shaping of all the ways how we got to the point we are now? And I would say, for one, we got new stuff. We got new stuff. Uh, Technology has definitely placed a heavy hand when it comes to the advancement of how we move forward. And when I think about technology, right, I'm considering how technology made it easier for people to do things on their own without needing the help for anyone else. And that came in the form of many things. You have appliances. There are things, appliances made things a lot easier for cooking. Instead of having to do everything by yourself and by hand, everything made things easier for cooking, for cleaning, hell, for childcare. You know, Automation has been a big boom that has helped a lot of people. You didn't even have to really walk because you have automobiles, you know. But when you look at all that stuff, you have to consider how the rules began to change as well. And when I'm talking about the rules changing, I mean like how the rules have changed because of technology, how the rules have changed in societal norms. Talking about how society's ideas about what men and women should have been doing, all that stuff changed over time. And the things that really popped in my mind that really jump out quickly, because I could try to sit here and really think about it, but I don't know how far my head will run down that deep. So I'll jump at some common things that we already know, and that would be the increasing of women entering the workforce. Right, they gained more economic independence. They were able to challenge a lot of traditional notions on what was whether they should be dependent on men. You know, a lot of women were able to change their attitudes when it came to gender I- gender identity. There were a lot of different changes when it came to sexual orientation, and you can kind of say that kind of made things a little complicated when moving forward to people who still wanted to look at gender roles, because there were people who there were women who still wanted to hold on to those roles, and because you had newer women that were coming into wanting to go change the system, that they actually shamed those who still wanted to live by normal society standards, what was considered normal, versus this new reframing that was coming up. A lot of women were happy but also empowered to do things alone. And what I'm basically discussing is how more people nowadays are focused on taking care of themselves rather than to look at others, and they don't really feel that there's a need to match up other people in order to help them. And that's another thing that you can look at with, bouncing back from not only how the change of the age had become societal norms. I don't know why I couldn't really think of that, but also because of technology. So you have a hand in hand that changed a whole bunch of different things. And because of that, a lot of people became very individualistic. There was a big emphasis on self-reliance. Anything you can do, I can do better. There's also the whole, because men were very individualistic already, but now there was a bigger need for men to compete with one another. You can actually say that it was probably easier, and I would know I didn't live in that time frame, but it was probably easier for men to some. Let me just put that out there because I go, it wasn't some. It was more ideal it was more ideal, and I would argue a little easier for some, if not most men, to find a mate. There was always a time period for women to find a mate. Not every woman did the same way, not every man did, in order to move forward, build a family, and be able to push their genes to the next generation. But because everybody became more individualized and they became more self-sufficient, the need for partners, the need for people to be in those certain roles diminished. And that because of the trends that we're picking up, this reflected a big change when it came to relationship dynamics. Hmm. Thinking about it, that was a big change for a lot of people. Many people prioritized personal growth, fulfillment over having a traditional partner. And now I'm trying to think of, because of the shift in how many people started really fighting back. 'Cause I'm thinking about the women that didn't want to be like their mother. Some women say, I wanted to be like my mother because she was home. She had a husband. She looked after me and my brothers and whatever, or she was big with the community and whatever. And then there were other women who said like, wow, my mother had a great, relationship, or the ideal or typical relationship with, my dad. I still looked at her as being in slavery. I've heard these different narratives they're putting out there. I've heard talking points on both sides, not just negative, but also positive. But it makes me think about the feelings that people made for themselves. I'm basically recognizing that even though we can do a lot together, people have really chose the need to still be by themselves. And keep in mind, there's a lot of things that we still need other people for, believe it or not. Why they don't think about it. You still need friends, you still need love, you still want support. These are things that, regardless of how much has changed and how independent you are, whether you're male or female, you still need these things. They're probably not as obtainable as they used to be. And in many ways, yes, they still are the same way. And in fact, if I would argue that you can get them in a lot of ways, because if you are a person who's always been a homebody, you don't really like to go out, you can find communities and people to speak to online. People have been able to do that through video games. They've been able to do that through forums. They've been able to do that on a podcast. Many people have been able to do that in a lot of different ways, but it doesn't mean that psychologically we don't need companionship, that we don't need support, that we don't need a group, a sense of belonging, that we don't need intimacy. These are the things that can only be fulfilled through relationships with other people, regardless of gender. And I'm thinking about this nature, of the natural things that people looked at as being natural versus society. I'm trying to think about how I want to say this because I'm a little scatterbrained on this one. But I want to think about whether our needing one another is about our bodies, or is it because of the way society tells us to act? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. How do I explore this a little bit more? All right. So I guess I'm trying to think of the difference between the social constructs and this biological imperative. Because there's a distinction between the both of them. I think about, when I'm thinking about the difference between these things, I'm thinking about things like reproduction, and I'm thinking about things like uh finding fulfillment in like relationships. I'm thinking about things like gender roles, which is really coming down to what a big crux of a lot of this stuff is about. Because there are biological factors that may influence certain aspects of our lives as human beings, as what considered to be part of our human behavior. But societal norms heavily shape our understanding of what we consider to be relationships between one another. And that's a very deep rabbit hole. I'm not thinking I'm wanting to explore, because I may not walk away from it, and I might get too far off from the initial question. Because even when let's just say I'm gonna start playing, I'm gonna start circling around the rabbit hole to see if I don't go down it. But I consider things like the differences in experience. I'm thinking about race, money. I'm thinking about who we're attracted to. What are the things that we're attracted to, or how we're expected to change particular things, and how we see relationships, especially with the expansion now. Because whether you want to be attracted to men or women, or if you say that you're gender fluid, or it's more acceptable to be bi or poly or pan, or there's so many things now. Relationship, finding a balance to be able to connect has become more difficult. And the reason why I say it's more difficult, because people, by nature of just how people are designed, they make things more difficult with the more choices, the more options that they run into. And I sit there, and I just started talking about all these different, how do you say the word? What's in my mind is social identities. What is the term to use? Intersectionality, which is interesting. Okay. So it says intersectionality refers to how various social identities intersect and influence individual experiences. That's the best way. I know I can sum it up real quick. We'll go back to some of the things I mentioned before: race, class, sexual dynamics when it comes to gender. And these are the things of how we shape people's needs, their experiences, everything that makes somebody pretty much different. Let me know if I'm saying that if I'm saying that right. It's not something I really dive into, so I can't say that I have a strong grasp of it at all. Let me know. I won't claim to know too much about it. I am damn for sure no expert. I am not a person who, even in my regular life, run into a lot of people who are of many aspects of gender. So, and I'm a person that talks to pretty much everybody, anybody, if they're willing to have a conversation with me. But yeah, this will be a good idea for anyone to really let me know more about the terms of intersectionality. And did I get that pretty much right? Because the little short definition I have here without totally diving down an article or something, I'm just not willing to do right now. And I want to try to stick to, at least try to stay on the original, which is, do men and women still need each other? And I think about these, I think about different, I'm thinking about the different content creators now. I almost call them experts. The different ones that mention so many different things when it comes to men and women, and the difference between men and women. And then I hear about masculinity and femininity and toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. And then there's content creators who are like scientists and doctors, people who are just sharing their opinions, people who are just spitballing and guessing, or those who just want to talk because they believe in traditionalism, and then others who talk because they believe in being more free and open. Pretty much, it's a pot, and a lot of people are trying to figure out a lot of stuff. If I'm even remembering properly, doctors are pretty much drawing perspectives. Some people are even talking about, like, are bringing up basically their medical expertise based on their profession, whether psychological or whether someone in sociology. The truth of the matter is that a lot of people are providing their own valuable insight, into this psychological aspect of human relationships. And these insights help, or at least they're trying to help us understand the biological and emotional drivers that go behind the need for connection. This is one that's really making me ponder a bit where we are, and the problems that we have, and what are the opportunities that we also have. Think about that. So if we're talking about the good and the bad things, right? The good and the bad things that could happen because of changes in how men and women see each other now. I've got so many thoughts that just they're flying through my mind right now. I'm trying to slow them down so I can speak about this. So there's a lot of challenges and opportunities that are basically being presented right now in regards to gender dynamics. And we're basically all trying to help each other. Well, not all of us are trying to help each other, but there's the need to understand and recognize the process that's being made in these areas where there needs to be a lot of improvement. And the issues that we're also needing to take into consideration with all the different insights on these challenges and these opportunities is that we have a challenge that we now need to embrace for some people's opportunities to grow. For some reason, because we have all of the stuff going on right now, it's in my opinion, it's more difficult, if not almost impossible, to find equity, because relationships are not about being equal. They're not. Some are more strong on one days than other days. Some have more particular talents than others do have. And the idea is, how do you make that work? Because it's going to be a yo-yo. And this is why it's such a big challenge now, because at least with the old days of gender roles, it wasn't a debate over who really needed to do what, but at the same time, there was a lot of potential that was left off the table. Because women traditionally were the ones who were in the kitchen and could cook. Again, not everybody got a maid. So there were men who literally had to cook for themselves. And then yet in this current age now, we have men who are shamed for cooking, and then there are women who are working class women who have been working class women, or who are doing things on their own. They're building businesses and they can't boil a freaking egg. And it's weird for men to shame other men, but if they take their chick out to eat, do you know who are predominantly the cooks, the chefs in those kitchens? They're mainly men. What are we saying here? I mean, thinking ahead, when I consider the future outlook of things, it's just, people are silly. I'm trying to imagine what things will be like in the future as we go forward. What are things going to be like between men, women, and just in gender relationships altogether? What's it going to be like? I'm speculating on this because there's going to be a lot of changes when it comes to gender dynamics. And I have no idea how that's going to allow us to anticipate these potential changes. And also, what's their implications? I have no idea how gender roles are expected to continue. Well, rather, I should say, continue to evolve. I didn't finish my question, my statement. I don't know my sentence. I'm trying to consider how gender roles are going to continue to evolve, especially in the response to what got us here, which is pretty much technology. This is a bit of a cultural change. The economic shift that took place again because there was a need, there was a cultural thing that happened. There was technology, a cultural need, and an economic shift that brought everything together. So it wasn't one thing. It wasn't it was three things. You needed particular conditions in order to create this. And those were the three conditions in my mind that put us forward on this path. It's not that we wouldn't get here um, on our own. I just think that there were particular key things in place in order for us to get there at the rate that we got here. I'm trying to figure out how can we better prepare for the future because we think of how things are now, but we really don't know what they're going to be like for the future. What we consider now in the gender dynamics between males and females can be something that gets pushed heavily out the door when we have other things to consider, other aspects of things to consider for the future. And the truth of the matter is that it's hard for me to say because I don't know what those things are. But I think and I'll just say this from my personal thing, it's kind of ridiculous when we can't put a finite label on things now when we just leave it up to the ether and just say anything can happen. Well, if anything can happen, then you can't expect any good relationships to really come out of anything. And if you're saying that relationships are not important, well, we're back to the original point of this question. Do men and women still need each other? Honestly speaking, I would say that the answer is no. I would say that the answer is no, that we no longer need each other, but at the same time, we do. And I think that's only because technology has not moved fast enough to take those things away. But I also have a feeling that technology is getting there. Procreation for reproduction is still needing both genders. I know there are people who are argue against that, but if resources died, so in instance, if eggs were all of a sudden, if clinics that were holding eggs all of a sudden fell in a big sinkhole, and clinics that hold sperm burned up because of some freak disaster, you would still need both those things for reproduction. Even if they were to start all over again, even if there wasn't actual intimacy happening between both sexes, you would still need both those components in order to create a life. As much as women don't want to say it, you still need a man in order to create a life. And men, in order to have a life moving forward, you also need women. Women need sperm, men need eggs. It's the only way life is moved forward. There's no other way around it. You cannot create something from nothing. Nothing has a value, and that value is absence. Overall, I mean, I think these discussions, these points have a framework that need to be explored a whole lot more because they're just very complex. And if we don't learn to actually come up with a proper framework to be able to manage things now, it will evolve into something that we will not be prepared for later. Today's revolutionaries become tomorrow's rebels. And everybody knows that you need to do something about a rebel. And it's never in a positive way. But I can't come down to an answer for it. But I know, in my opinion, I would say that technology has put us in a way right now that we don't necessarily need to lean on each other the way that we need to. But at the same time, we do still need each other if we are going to move forward in pushing this race, the human race forward. Because it's the only way that we can actually still live in the future. That we can still make sure that we have a species in the future. But outside of that, outside of reproduction, there's not a whole lot that we need each other for. But also because of technology, we're becoming very lax, mediocre, dumb. That's a topic for another time. Listen, if you guys enjoyed having me do this little rant, which is not a rant, I don't know why I called it a rant. I would like to have that conversation with you. I've been thinking a lot about where the channel is going to be going. Typically, I am trying to make videos. I would like to have an actual conversation with you guys as well. Just maybe we can have a live and just kick it out, whatever. I'm always worried about where the channel is going, and I want this to be an authentic thing. Anyway, I don't want to ramble, so I'll let you go back to your day. You let me know in the comment section what you think about all this stuff. Do you believe that we're just totally done for and men and women don't need each other anymore? Or do you think there's still a little bit of hope, and why? Until then, you take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one and stay opinionated. Later, guys.